Personality versus character. We often use the words personality and character interchangeably to describe ourselves and others. However, these words are not synonymous. Rather, they indicate two distinct, yet related attributes of being. Webster defines personality as the quality or state of being a person, and character as the complex of mental and ethical traits marking and often individualizing a person. According to Webster, personality is merely the state of existing. Though we often use the word to indicate specific behavioral traits and preferences of a person, personality itself is inherent to being alive and conscious. What follows is that character is the manifestation of these traits. In other words, we have personality by virtue of being, but we understand ourselves and others as individual conscious persons through character. That means that character can influence personality, but personality is unchanging. Components of personality. While there are many different theories of personality, the first step is to understand exactly what is meant by the term personality. A brief definition would be that personality is made up of the characteristic patterns of thoughts, feelings and behaviors that make a person unique. In addition to this, personality arises from within the individual and remains fairly consistent throughout life. Some of the fundamental characteristics of personality include consistency. There is generally a recognizable order and regularity to behaviors. Essentially, people act in the same ways or similar ways in a variety of situations. Psychological and physiological. Personality is a psychological construct, but research suggests that it is also influenced by biological processes and needs. Impact behaviors and actions. Personality does not just influence how we move and respond in our environment, it also causes us to act in certain ways. Multiple expressions. Personality is displayed in more than just behavior. It can also be seen in out thoughts, feelings, close relationships and other social interactions. Early attempts at classification of personality. In the West, as also in India, attempts were made to classify personality of individuals on the basis of their physique and sometimes on the basis of chemic, biochemical and glandular characteristics. William Herbert Sheldon, 1898-1977, an American psychologist, related body with temperament. The personality types proposed by Sheldon on the basis of bodily constitution were 1. Endomorphic, with relatively prominent abdomen and fatty tissues, E. Mesomorphic, muscular built and strong bones, athletic type, and E. Ectomorphic, relatively delicate and thin body built. A typically endomorphic person, for example, is likely to be an obese, mesomorphic, square and muscular, and the ectomorphic, tall and thin. Describing people on the basis of their body features and associating them with their temperament is called somatotypes. Sheldon and Stevens found endomorphic to be correlated with highly comfort-loving, less reactive and relaxed, viscerotonic, mesomorphic, as one who loves physical adventure, competitive aggressiveness, and general assertiveness, somatotonic, ectomorphic as one correlated with those who express fast reactions, chronic fatigue, suppressed social responsiveness, restraint and tense posture, cerebrotomic. In ancient Greece, personality was described in terms of chemic or biochemical and glandular characteristics. The term chemic was used by Woodworth and Marquis in 1947. These individuals are said to have varying degrees of the following four temperaments: the sanguine, extrovert, the choleric, energetic, the phlegmatic, and the melancholic, thoughtful, worried. A typically sanguine person is one who has an excess of blood, the choleric, excess of bile, the phlegmatic, excess of mucus, and the melancholic, excess of spleen. Interestingly, one can easily draw a parallel between the ancient Greek and ancient Indian classifications, Ayurveda, which described the above-mentioned four temperaments respectively as Rakta Pradhan, Pitta Pradhan, Kapha Pradhan and Vayu Pradhan. But today such classifications of personality in terms of distinctive types have remained only of historical importance. Pigeonholing people into types is an attempt to oversimplify the complexity of human personality. Thinking of a pure type can only be an exception, never a rule. People, in fact, may have characteristics of various groups in varying degrees. On each of these traits, a person can be said to have a position somewhere on a continuum from extremely high to extremely low. The trait cluster or dominant component concept of personality. The recent attempts at character and personality descriptions are quantitative. In this process, measurements on a large number of behavior traits are taken of a large number of individuals. Then intercorrelations among these variables are computed. From the correlations, cluster of traits and set of symptoms are identified. These trait syndromes are represented by a set of trait clusters that intercorrelate highly with one another, very low or not at all with measures of other trait clusters. These statistically isolated components are considered to represent personality factors or character factors. In this way, personality and character can be described in terms of relative strengths of various components or factors. Async, 1960, attempted to classify personality in terms of extroversion-introversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism dimensions. A typically extrovert will be one who is highly sociable, happy-go-lucky, makes friends easily, is talkative, etc. The introvert will be extremely low on all such traits. A person high on neuroticism dimension will be emotionally unstable, whereas a person low on the dimension will be emotionally stable. Person with high score on psychoticism will be a tough-minded person, and low on this dimension will be tender-minded. In this way, a number of psychologists worked on personality and have evolved different theories. Detailed description of such theories is beyond the scope of this unit. We shall be mainly concerned with those personality types which involve ethical or moral dimensions. Personality disorders. Personality disorders are mental illnesses that share several unique qualities. They contain symptoms that are enduring and play a major role in most, if not all, aspects of the person's life. While many disorders vacillate in terms of symptom presence and intensity, personality disorders typically remain relatively constant. To be diagnosed with a disorder in this category, a psychologist will look for the following criteria. 1. Symptoms have been present for an extended period of time, are inflexible and pervasive, and are not a result of alcohol or drugs or another psychiatric disorder. The history of symptoms can be traced back to adolescence or at least early adulthood. 2. The symptoms have caused and continue to cause significant distress or negative consequences in different aspects of the person's life. 3. Symptoms are seen in at least two of the following areas: thoughts, ways of looking at the world, thinking about self or others, and interacting. Emotions, appropriateness, intensity, and range of emotional functioning. Interpersonal functioning, relationships and interpersonal skills. Antisocial personality disorder. This disorder was previously known as both psychopathic and sociopathic personality disorder. Like most personality disorders, there are many factors that may contribute to the development of symptoms. Because the symptoms are long-lasting, the idea that symptoms begin to emerge in childhood or at least adolescence is well accepted. The negative consequences of such symptoms, however, may not show themselves until adulthood. These behaviors include difficulty with authority, legal altercations, cruelty to animals, fire setting, and a dislike or anger toward authority. This disorder is diagnosed much more frequently in male. The symptoms of antisocial personality disorder include a long-standing pattern, after the age of 15, of disregard for the rights of others. There is a failure to conform to society's norms and expectations that often results in numerous arrests or legal involvement, as well as a history of deceitfulness. Some argue that a major component of this disorder is the reduced ability to feel empathy for other people. This inability to see the hurts, concerns, and other feelings of people often results in a disregard for these aspects of human interaction. Finally, irresponsible behavior often accompanies this disorder, as well as a lack of remorse for wrongdoings. Treatment for this disorder is very rarely sought. There is a limited amount of insight into the symptoms, and the negative consequences are often blamed on society. In this sense, treatment options are limited. Some research has found long-term insight-oriented therapy to be effective, but getting the individual to commit to this treatment is a major obstacle. People with antisocial personality disorder typically see the world as having the problems, not him or herself, and therefore rarely seek treatment. If progress is made, it is typically over an extended period of time. B. Borderline personality disorder. The major symptoms of this disorder revolve around unstable relationships, poor or negative sense of self, inconsistent moods, and significant impulsivity. There is an intense fear of abandonment with this disorder that interferes with many aspects of the individual's life. This fear often acts as a self-fulfilling prophecy as they cling to others, are very needy, feel helpless, and become overly involved and immediately attached. When the fear of abandonment becomes overwhelming, they will often push others out of their life as if trying to avoid getting rejected. The cycle most often continues as the individual will then try everything to get people back in his or her life and once again becomes clingy, needy, and helpless. The fact that people often do leave someone who exhibits this behavior only proves to support the distorted belief that they are insignificant, worthless, and unloved. At this point in the cycle, the individual may exhibit self-harming behaviors such as suicide attempts, mock suicidal attempts, where the goal is to get rescued and lure others back into the individual's life, cutting or other self-mutilating behavior. There is often intense and sudden anger involved, directed both at self and others, as well as difficulty controlling destructive behaviors. Treatment for this disorder is long-term in nature since the symptoms have been present for an extended time and interfere with many aspects of the person's life. Insight-oriented therapy can be helpful, but research is showing an increased support for a cognitive behavioral approach. In other words, the individual's thoughts and actions are monitored both by the self and therapist, and specific behaviors are counted, and a plan is made to gradually reduce those thoughts and behaviors that are seen as negative. A combined approach may be best, but either way requires intensive time and effort. While the disorder is chronic in nature, gradual improvements with work are definitely seen. While it is difficult for anyone to change major aspects of their personality, the symptoms of this disorder can be reduced in both number and intensity. Long-term treatment is almost always required. C. Narcissistic personality disorder. The symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder revolve around a pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and sense of entitlement. Often individuals feel overly important and will exaggerate achievements and will accept, and often demand, praise and admiration despite worthy achievements. They may be overwhelmed with fantasies involving unlimited success, power, love, or beauty, and feel that they can only be understood by others who are, like them, superior in some aspect of life. There is a sense of entitlement, of being more deserving than others based solely on their superiority. These symptoms, however, are a result of an underlying sense of inferiority and are often seen as overcompensation. Because of this, they are often envious and even angry of others who have more, receive more respect or attention, or otherwise steal away the spotlight. Treatment for this disorder is very rarely sought. There is a limited amount of insight into the symptoms, and the negative consequences are often blamed on society. In this sense, treatment options are limited. Some research has found long-term insight-oriented therapy to be effective, but getting the individual to commit to this treatment is a major obstacle. Character and its factors, vectors. Peck A. al. 1962, found 6 major components, factors or vectors which contribute to the overall maturity of one's character. These components are moral stability, the tendency to follow moral code willingly and with satisfaction. Ego strength, perceptual accuracy, rational judgment and appropriate action. Superego strength, the degree of inner control over behavior or conscience. Spontaneity, direct expression of feelings and wishes. Friendliness, generalized warmth of feeling for others. Hostility guilt complex, strong feelings of hostility and guilt. It is pertinent to mention that moral stability, ego strength, superego strength and friendliness are positively correlated with general maturity of character. Spontaneity shows a curious relationship with maturity of character. People at both the extreme ends of maturity scales are high in spontaneity, whereas those of intermediate maturity of character are low in spontaneity. This means that highly spontaneous individuals may be either highly mature or highly immature in their character development. The hostility-guilt complex is negatively correlated with character development. Character personality patterns. On the basis of the relative strength of these 6 factors, 5 character personality patterns have been found. These character organizations are discussed briefly as under: the amoral type, moral stability, superego strength, and friendliness, high in hostility and guilt. The expedient type, below average in ego strength, superego strength, moral stability and friendliness, high in spontaneity and hostility guilt. Conforming type, moderate ego, superego and friendliness. The irrational conscientious type, weak to moderate in ego strength, low in friendliness, high in hostility guilt, superego strength and moral stability. The rationalistic altruistic type, high in ego strength, superego strength, moral stability, spontaneity and friendliness, but low in hostility guilt. A brief description of individuals typically representing the above types is given below. The amoral individual. The infant begins as an amoral individual, the one who can neither be called moral nor immoral. Such a person has inaccurate perception, highly unstable emotions and absence of self-control. She is impulsive and spontaneous. Her behavior is determined on the basis of physical rewards and punishments. The adult amoral type becomes arrested at the infantile stage of development. In some extreme cases, adult psychopath personality is of this type. Example: a 20-year-old boy was referred to a psychologist by district court. His social history revealed a pattern of defiance to authority, violent temper resulting in impulsive and irresponsible behavior, lack of concern for the consequences of his acts. He was a chronic liar, and had reports of chronic truancy and running away from home. He very often forged his father's signature on checks and ultimately got arrested. An interview with him showed that he could easily fabricate stories. He had superior general intelligence and could rationalize his behavior in an effective manner. The expedient individual. Expedient individuals are those who have learned about social rewards and punishment patterns of their cultures and are controlled by immediate consequences. They are primarily self-centered. Their honesty or dishonesty depends on situations and apparent advantage of these. In an experiment, children below the age of 9 told that they feel sorry for lies that do not work, but not for undetected lies. The adult expedient may act honestly because it is good business to have truth-telling reputation and to have people's confidence in him. However, when probable rewards become sufficiently large, or if he thinks he can avoid being detected, he would be dishonest. That is, if the situation is such that telling a lie would work, they will not hesitate, but if they think they would be detected or caught, they will pretend to be honest. Such a person conforms to social expectations, in order to achieve personal advantage. He has no internalized set of ideals, has no conscience or superego. The conformer. Children in the middle and late childhood stage of the development often display conforming patterns of social behavior. At this stage, the child internalizes one general principle of behavior, i.e., to do what one should, and what one shouldn't, is to conform to rules of his social group. He tends to follow the social norms and thereby avoids the shame of social disapproval. In this respect, the individual, conformer, is different from the expedient individual. The expedient plays each situation to pick relevant social norms and follows them to show others that he has respect for such norms. However, in reality, he tries to gain sympathy and confidence of the social group. The conformer, on the other hand, follows these rules from the core of his heart, conventionally and rigidly. He is controlled by external, social, sanctions and feels ashamed when deviates from social mores. Right, for him, means acting according to social rules and conventions. He is uncomfortable when such rules, customs, or principles are violated by him. He would never like to violate the rules even if breaking them is in general human or social welfare. He tends to adhere to them under all circumstances. For example, he would never like to tell a lie in any circumstance, even if it for a good cause. Following is a typical example of a conformist child. Veena belonged to a lower middle-class family. Her father was a strict disciplinarian who would tolerate no nonsense or misdeed from his children. Veena's mother was very efficient but a passive person. Both parents were religious and regularly attended prayer ceremonies. Veena's home environment was rigid, restrictive, one that fostered conformity and dependency. Spontaneity, self-expression and rationality were not encouraged or rewarded. Veena, at the age of 10, was rated as a superior individual by her parents, teachers and peers. She was very responsible, always finished her tasks on time, did her share of work and was polite, honest and controlled. Being good for her meant respecting parents and teachers, remaining neat and clean and being nice to younger brothers and sisters. Being bad, for her, was disobeying parents or elders, talking back to teachers and being untidy. By the time Veena was 15, her popularity had declined considerably. She associated with only those boys, girls who were just like her. She was over-anxious to please lest she should make mistakes. The pattern of behavior that was considered desirable at the age of 10 had remained unchanged, whereas the frame of reference by which she was judged at the age of 15 changed. Elders started calling her immature, one whose development had been arrested. Veena's behavior was rigid rather than spontaneous. She had a good deal of social anxiety. Though she pretended to look like her classmates, but in reality she was unable to display depth of feeling towards them. The irrational conscientious personality. The irrational conscientious person is one who has internalized a behavior code that he strongly believes. The total behavior of the individual is guided by this code of conduct. If such a person sees an act as honest, he carries it out, irrespective of whether or not other persons approve of it and irrespective of its consequences on others. When his acts conflict with his code, he feels guilty. He violates his own integrity. Of course, the internalization of a set of ideals is a stage in normal development. It is a characteristic of maturity. The irrational component of this syndrome constitutes a blind alley. Such an individual develops a rigid, logic-tight system that functions autonomously and without regard to its social consequences. Acts are good or bad in a kind of absolute manner because of their self-evident nature or because one's conscience tells him so. Such people do not recognize that rules and principles which they have internalized are originally man-made, and are intended to serve humane or altruistic purposes. The rational altruistic. In most cultures, the rational altruistic individual is considered at the highest level of character development. Persons possessing this level of character development have a set of appropriate internalized moral principles, but these internalized values constitute an open rather than a closed system. These principles are subject to modifications in view of circumstances. The individual behavior is determined not only by his own conscience but also by the judgmental effects on others. Such a person is honest and loyal because such behavior contributes to the welfare of other persons including his own. Such type of individual is rational because he evaluates his conduct realistically and in terms of probable consequences. He does not act impulsively or compulsively in rigid ways. He is altruistic because he considers the ultimate welfare of others as well as of himself. He does not blindly follow the internalized rules and principles without regard to its social effects on others. Such an individual is flexible and his behavior is guided by spirit, rather than letter, of the law. He is consistent and firm in his principles for which he stands but is not rigid in his behavior.